Hello, Kevin. Welcome to the Regenerative Work-Life Podcast. I am so happy that you are here with me today to share your story and your wisdom and your experience. And I just know that the listeners are going to really be inspired by what you have to say, because every time we talk, I find myself uplifted and inspired and seeing things in a new way. So thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Alyssa. I am excited and looking forward to it.
For our listeners today, Kevin and I are going to try something a little bit new on the podcast, and we're going to be influenced by the desert island disc style of conversation, which will probably be very familiar to my listeners in the UK. If you're outside of the UK, it's kind of a British radio institution where people come on and tell their life stories, and it's punctuated by these 5 records that they've chosen to take to a desert island with them. I don't know, it somehow makes sense. So instead of Kevin bringing with us 5 records that will help him kind of unfold the story of his career, Kevin has 5 lessons that he has brought with him today that he's going to share with you as we weave through the story of Kevin's career. So we're really looking forward to hearing those lessons. But let's start, Kevin, with, why don't you tell us the story of your career and how, up to the sort of high point of, let's say, the traditional version of your career. Take us up to that point, and then we'll talk about what shifted for you.
Okay. So, my traditional career was as a business banker. And I'm one of those people who were blessed enough to know pretty early in my collegiate career that I wanted to be a banker, that I love economics, that I love working with creative people, with entrepreneurs, and love participating in making economic activity happen. And so to go on, since I knew early, I was able to craft my academic background, to my own unique, peculiar, individualistic expression. So instead of doing a traditional MBA, finance degree MBA program, which in the United States is pretty standard, approach to being a banker, I decided to get my undergraduate degree in economics, a bachelor of science degree in economics, and then I went to law school. And it was intentional. I wanted to use these 2 different types of disciplines as the way to solve problems, to be creative, to analyze economic activity, and to assess risk, whether it's investment risk or credit risk, so that I could be informed differently than, let's say, most bankers. And so that's how I launched into my career. And I started off actually in disaster assistance. The We had a massive earthquake called the Northridge earthquake in California in 1994. This is at the start of my career. And it was the largest natural disaster in U.S. history up to that point. And we have a federal agency called FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. And so my first job after law school, before I really got into banking full force, was to be a disaster assistance loan officer, to approve disaster loans up to $1.5 million for businesses, for individuals, based on the losses that they suffered because of this massive earthquake in California. And so starting from that experience, this is where I really touched into this notion of um, providing services that really serve people's lives, and that became like the juice for me throughout my banking career. And it's an amazing experience. We can spend much of the time just talking about that experience, but the bottom line is, after I did that for a year, because you serve a full year commitment in FEMA, I went on to traditional commercial banking, and with a focus on smaller businesses, and then progressively into middle-sized businesses or what have you. And my passion was to, how do you customize financial services? Most entrepreneurs, most creatives who are in business, They're not finance people. They are developing products and services, and they just need high quality advice and properly priced capital in order to achieve their dreams. And so I love to be that solution, that call, that person who you could brainstorm with, and we can customize financial services to actually meet the needs of the particular entrepreneur. And so that's what I did for 25 years. That was my traditional career. And I was very passionate about it and would have done that for the rest of my life, you know. So this is the crescendo of my traditional career, and so I can stop there. And then if you want to.
It's really interesting actually because I mean, so people will have already heard, okay, you're interviewing a banker. This is not maybe what you would expect to hear, right, on the Regenerative Work Life podcast. But I think already you've kind of given us this sort of breadcrumb trail of clues that a shift was coming in your career because I admit I don't spend a lot of time talking to people in the financial services industry, but I don't immediately associate that sector with some of the things that you were talking about, like passion. Like right from the beginning, you've spoken about like your passion for economics, your passion for serving people, for creating services that really meet someone's needs. And you spoke kind of that you very consciously chose how you were going to approach this career. So again, I sort of see a level of consciousness, whereas honestly, like the story I hear most of the time is like people were just following the money. That was the kind of path that was laid out that seemed like, great, I'll give them 10, 15 years of my life. I'll make enough money and I'll move on after that. And it seems like for you, right from the beginning, there was something different about how you're approaching it. So yeah, I'd love to come on to you're at the crescendo, you're deep into this career, and then perhaps something begins to shift.
Well, I think it would be timely to give you an example from my traditional career of the passion in which you speak of and why because there is a thread of resonance that led to the transition. So this is an actual customer without naming their name. But this is what I mean about the connection with the customer. So this particular customer had been they had gone to college and it didn't work out for them. They probably went to college for about a year or so, and either they failed out or it just wasn't their interest, and so they went back home to rural Arkansas, you know, and almost Appalachia in the United States, and they went to work in a pizza parlor, right? And they delivered pizzas, and then they start making the pizzas, and then they became a shift supervisor, and then they became the store manager of a particular pizzeria, a Domino's Pizza, which is a franchise in the United States. And then they became the franchisee owner who owned like 5 of these Domino's pizzas, promoted them to larger stores until they got promoted to the largest store, until they became the general manager for all 5 stores. And when I met them, they had an opportunity. The owner of that franchisee said, I want to sell the franchise. I'm retiring. I want to sell it to my best employee. And it was this person. And they took their entire life savings because they weren't making much money all the way up that process, and this was going to be like a $2.5 million purchase for a person who was delivering pizzas, who were making pizzas, they put 20 years of their life into it. And now they had the opportunity to own, right? And so here I was, the provider of the financing to someone who put their life savings in. And so that was the kind of connections that I was making as a banker, is to say, okay, this is this person's dream. There's no one who knows how to run these 5 pizza parlors better than this person. And they're doing an outstanding job. They're doing an amazing job. This is the person you're going to lend, millions of dollars to with no collateral. I mean, because there's no real estate. There's just the business operations. And so this is the kind of thing that really was the juice for my career. It wasn't making as much money as I possibly can. It was having that kind of impact in the lives of real people. We never met, but I can tell you The reason why I became a banker was to find that person who put that much effort in, and all they needed was the financial services to make their dream come true. And so, yeah, that's one of my proudest loans over the course of my banking career. And but using that as a launching pad, you know, one of the things I noticed as I was going through my banking career, and I was enjoying doing these deals and the relationships I was building with each customer, um, what I noticed is it was really hard. It was harder and harder for people to start a business in the United States. That in order to start a business, you had to have savings, right? You had to make enough money doing whatever you were doing before to have some capital. Because if you started a business and you tried to borrow everything, your margin of error was at the minimum, right? You never know how much working capital you're going to need for your business to get through the development cycle and sustain and become self-sustaining. So as much money as you could save is good, right? And then yes, to the extent you need to borrow, fine. But and less people had the money to save to start the business. And so more and more people were using leverage. And this was causing business failure. So in other words, the success was much more a function of whether you could save enough to give yourself enough a cushion not to over leverage before you could sustain yourself. And so that led me into, well, what is going on in our economy that this is happening? Because what it was really doing is nationally, new business formation was declining dramatically, you know. And yeah, there were change. And what it did is led me to look at the broader macroeconomics and how they were changing, and it really had a function to do, without getting into the details, with the inequality, the magnitude of the distribution of income in the U.S. economy, given whatever our productivity was as a country. The income from that productivity was going progressively to the top, much more so than had been decades before. And so the discretionary income of the working class, the discretionary income of the middle class, who would be the source of new business formation, right, was diminishing to the point where they were not able to start businesses as they historically had been able to. So you have creatives coming up with great ideas and cannot realize them because either it's going to take too much capital that they have to borrow, or they don't have enough to save, and so on and so forth. So this led me down a path of what is going on here. I'm basically, my customer who I'm helping are more and more privileged, because they're becoming the people who have the capacity to save, as opposed to the people I was working before, which is the whole, we have this Horatio Alger story, of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and, the regular person becoming the entrepreneur, creating real wealth and so on. That story was going away. And so that led me down this whole journey. And so once I got into the economics and that problem, and why is that happening, I came across another problem, right? Which is, we have this problem in our environment, this problem with climate, this problem with it's an offshoot of our economics, which is, what is the source of energy for the economics that is producing this inequality? And the source of that energy is fossil fuels. And it was starting to cause a problem. It was starting to change the very ecology that sustains all life on Earth. And as I started to discover this problem, I noticed that most sources of information didn't talk about it like it was a problem. And the more some people started talking about, no, we're having a problem in our climate because of how we live, of consumption, of how we burn energy and stuff like that, those people were starting to be radicalized. Were starting to be ostracized. Were starting to be marginalized. And the prevailing story was, no, everything is good, and let's just keep on growing, and keep on going. And you bankers, yes, keep on providing capital. And so it was digging into that story that led me to the realization that actually we have we actually have a crisis. The climate is a crisis, and it's not a matter of faith. It's a basic principle of science that that and so I realized that if I want to serve people, which is what gave me the juice in my banking career, the best way I could serve people is participate in mitigating the climate crisis, because the implications of what was happening in climate was that over the next 10 years, whatever we do is going to define life on earth for hundreds, for thousands of years, right? Because of we have this little window of opportunity. So from my perspective, it became all hands on deck. What can I do? Here I was sitting in the fifth largest bank in the United States, which is US Bank. And so I said, okay, I need to make a change. I can't just do deals, you know, and so that's what led me down this path of, okay, how can I change?
And
And so we can,
yeah, I
hopefully that
think
answers that question.
I it's really clear how those your growing awareness of those two crises, which of course go hand in hand, inequality and climate, really brought you to this point where, as you say, the question became, what can I do? Do I keep making
Yeah.
deals? Are we going to deal our way out of this? And I think that brings us really nicely to your first lesson for our listeners, Kevin, which was to develop a clear intention. Can you speak around that lesson and how that showed up for you at that time as you were asking the question, what can I do? It's all hands on deck. This is a crisis. And you were, yeah.
Exactly. Yes, thank you for that question. This is really a foundational question in terms of who we are and what we're capable of. Part of my transition is I went through a crisis moment. I was doing deals, I was serving individuals, but I was no longer getting fulfilled. And the reason why is because there was a greater purpose that was out there that what I was doing wasn't meeting. So it really had to the start was to understand, okay, what is truly important to Kevin Howard? That would make me feel I'm serving my purpose, my greatest purpose, and that would bring that sense of fulfillment, because I had success in doing what I was doing, but it felt hollow. At one point it was wonderful, but progressively it felt hollow, and it was this calling that there was a more important thing to do that I could use my skills to do. And so, as a part of that journey and a part of that understanding of who I am, right? I came to learn that that I'm empowered. We are all empowered to co-create our reality based on how we direct our energy. And so the process by which I came to learn to do that is to state your intention clearly. What is it that I intend to do that I can then work on each day and manifest that intention in the reality of my new situation? That could be, starting a business, that could be writing a book, that could be going into politics, whatever. But if you notice, if you look into your life, what you choose to put your energy in is the very things that bloom, right? And so, but it starts with a clear intention. Here, I was well defined in my career, and making decent money and keeping the lights on, so you don't go willy nilly and say, okay, I'm doing the Tom Cruise thing and who's with me, stand up and go and leave the room. No, you have to be pragmatic at the same time. And so what was my intention? Understanding that I needed to understand, is what I think about climate, what is true about climate to suggest that it may be an actual existential thing. And so I had to educate myself, to what's the signal versus what's the noise. And so I dive deep into the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. at the United Nations because it was a global organization of 195 member nations, the best and brightest of the scientific community in each one of these nations, including the United States and all the countries we know, and that they produced these huge assessments, which are meta-analyses on all issues relating to climate. And so and then they produced these reports, these massive reports, and then these summary reports. And in the summary report, it was the most important assessment, the most important determinations that they had made. But every country in the world had to agree to them. So this was a global consensus on all these critical issues relating to climate. And when I read that is when I came to know, oh, so scientists in Israel, in Russia, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in the United States, all agree, in China, all agree that if the global average surface temperature goes to 2 degrees Celsius, we're going to have existential impacts across this globe. Right? Okay, so there's nothing else that those people agree on, but they agree on this. So now we have consensus. So then my intention then became, what is it that I want to do? I want to shift my career into some sort of climate risk management position where we can mitigate, we can try to prevent these worst possible impacts. What is the effort we need to do to hold global average surface temperature from rising to 2 degrees Celsius? Okay, because we're on that path. Okay, and that position needed to be of strategic nature. So an enterprise level type position, that would have meaningful impact in that effort, that global effort to address global warming, which was leading to the climate crisis. So that was my intention, and it was informed by actual information, the best information I can get. And that's a hard task in terms of the best information you get, because we are immersed in spin and all types of vested interests, and so that's a lot of noise that could lead us in a lot of, so I was lucky to be able to find what I consider the definitive bit of information. And so yes, state your intention clearly,
Yeah.
so that you can then now this is what I need to put my energy in. And so what can I do every day to serve that intention?
I think that it's so powerful and so important for people to hear, because the thing that I would say I see so consistently from people who have a similar realization, whatever sector, whatever career they're in, there is this kind of turning point where where they were experiencing success, something where they were feeling fulfilled, where it felt purposeful, no longer feels that way. There's some, they begin to see it more deeply. They come at it with a different worldview. New information comes up, and that shifts. And I think that is the point where a lot of people then become very lost, because they've had to sort of let go and go through a kind of, there's a real grieving process, right, in letting go of the paradigms that we held on to so tightly before. And then who are we without those things that we really identified with? And I think what you said about developing clear intention, to me, I often use the word vision. It's the same thing. It's, you have to have this direction. To put it in its simplest terms, like, if you don't know what you want, like, you won't get it,
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people who are frustrated because they're not finding the direction, they're not finding the opportunities, but they haven't done this really simple step of just stating out loud, what is your intention? And it doesn't have to be, as you just described, fully formed. You didn't know exactly what career you were going to go into, right? You knew you had to answer this question of, what can I do with this knowledge that I now have, right? And then you knew it was going to be something in climate risk, right? So that defined it a little bit more clearly for you, and we'll come on to like what you then did. But I think this is just really something I want to kind of bookmark for people and make sure they hear, is like, state that intention, know the direction. If you don't know the full picture, most people don't, but like, whatever you do know, say it out loud and put your energy on that. And I
together.
think this
That
probably leads us quite nicely into the second of your lessons for us, Kevin, which is to let go of the how. Because I think that's going to be the big question that comes up for people next. Like when you know you need to make a shift, you know you've educated yourself, you've got the knowledge that you need to make this change. But then how on earth do you do it? What is the next step? What is the next role? How did you approach that as you knew you needed to make this big change in your career, you knew you needed to commit it to climate, but I'm guessing you didn't know exactly how you were going to go about that.
Well, the thing is, and thank you again for that opportunity to talk about let go of the how. This was of the lessons. This was the hardest one for me because it cuts against the grain of how we are socialized. We are socialized in Western civilization to be very plan orientated. These are the 12 steps to get you from point A to point B, and then you dedicate yourself to following those steps to get there, right? And so that's this is was my the approach that I had known, but I had come to realize that the problem with that is that is taking the information you know at the beginning of the journey. And whatever information that is, it's not going to be as much information you're going to know as you get a third of the way, half of the way, and so on. And it's actually pigeonholing you like a pin light into one path to where you want to go. Now, at the end of the day, you just want to get to where you want to go. You want your intention to manifest, right? It is much more about ego that it has to happen in some pre-stated way. But this is how we're socialized. And the downside of that, because it's not some esoteric ego, non-ego thing, is is that what you're trying to do is take what opportunities life literally presents to you that moves you closer and closer and closer to your goal. And by narrowing your focus to some preset series of steps, you are missing a wide range of opportunities that would accelerate you to where you want to go, but you don't see them because I'm following the 12 steps. Right. So the power of letting go of the how, I don't know. Just sit with that for a second. And then you breathe. Letting go of the how you're going to get there does not make you a guru, pie in the sky, woo woo person. What it does is it frees you to say, okay, what can I do today? What opportunities are present today? Wide range that I am not considering, that I have not considered, which present the best opportunity for me to make improvement today, for me to move closer to my goal today. You know, when we look back at all the amazing accomplishments we've actually been able to do in our lives, we will notice, and this is what I did, and this is how I came to understand let go of the how, that the actual route we took was rather circuitous. It rarely is the 12 steps and you follow the 12 steps and they worked out just like that or whatever. So this is just doing it intentionally. This is just doing it in advance. Let go of the how for a second. And that doesn't mean that you have no plan. It merely means that a part of your aspiration is not strict to how you're going to do it. In fact, that's secondary how you're going to do it. The question is that you do it, you know. And so once I started doing this, it allowed me to see opportunities in different directions that really accelerated me towards, where I wanted to go. And so here I was working in the SBA division for the fifth largest bank in the country. And for context, the SBA division, the Small Business Administration guarantee, it's a guaranteed loan program, in the United States, was like less than 1% of the total credit offered by US banks. So this is a small group, right? And I was doing large loans in that small little itty bitty group. And yet I want to do something that's going to direct how the entire bank allocates its $600 billion worth of credit. Right. Okay. Okay. So how do I get from there to there? Right. Okay. So expanding my background, never been in risk management, always been in the business line and stuff like that. But risk management is who's going to be doing climate, who's going to be directing, making decisions across the bank. I had to get closer to that. And so I looked at the job postings in US Bank, and I had a good reputation and good relationship with the bank. And I found an opportunity in portfolio risk management. So portfolio risk management is the group that looks at the entire commercial portfolio of the bank, maybe about, you know, $400 billion worth of exposures or whatever, a huge portion of the bank, and that they look at managing the risk from the top down as opposed from the business, each business line, each individual deal. And so I found a position in credit risk management, right? Excuse me, in credit policy management in that group. And that became an incremental step. And what that did is that it allowed me to demonstrate my skills and my interest in climate to people closer to the top of the house, closer to the people who were going to decide the direction of the bank. And that opened the door to, once I got into that position and demonstrated my abilities in that position, when the bank decided it was time for us to actually recognize climate risk as a real risk, they were looking internally for people who were interested in going back to school to do it. And I had been able to build relationships from that intermediate position, right? From doing credit policy risk, um, to to be a part of that stand up unit. I became the climate risk qualitative lead for US Bank. There's the climate risk executive, there's the qualitative lead, and there's the quantitative lead, and that's it, right? And so that's how letting go of the how
Yeah.
manifested is that I found my way into enterprise risk in a manner that I had never done before, and wouldn't have been able to anticipate sitting from the SBA division. Okay, what's my 12 steps? you know,
Yeah, and what's so
so
interesting is that
that's
when you tell the story, it sounds so strategic. It sounds like you could have, looking back, it kind of sounds like you could have planned it that way, but that wasn't how it happened. I just really want to underline that, what you're saying is when you let go of that how, that's when the possibilities opened up to you. Because as you said, you were contained by what you were able to understand from that starting perspective. And that's the thing, when we
yeah,
rush towards the I want to get to the destination, I want to get to a place where it feels like I've made it, I've done it, that we can only move incrementally from wherever we start. And actually, most often what we're going to end up with is a slightly improved version of whatever it was that we had before. But what you've
yeah.
described to us is like really sort of fundamental shift and change, and putting yourself in a position where you could really have that level of impact that you saw was necessary because of the scale of the
At the
crisis.
scale of the problem.
Yeah.
Yes,
And I think
yes.
that also, I mean, could you speak to your third lesson here, which is to maximize your range of consideration? Because I think this is another area where we box ourselves in. And it sounds like from what you've shared that your openness to the way that this might unfold was a real key component of that successful shift.
Absolutely. Again, we pit locking into the knowing, by locking into what we've done, by locking into how we do things, right? It's so limiting in terms of the range of possibilities that we can do things that can serve us, that can spur our growth. So the notion of maximizing the range of consideration. Again, I had no background outside of the various lines of businesses that I had worked in. And I had worked in several: home builder, franchise finance, SBA, so I had a lot of business line experience, but no experience managing, risk, at least at an enterprise level. And so how do I leverage the experience I did have to get into a position that would be of value to the people at that level? And so this was where, in terms of broadening and these new possibilities, looking in areas of the bank that I didn't know existed, looking in areas of the bank and reading what they're looking for and the kind of backgrounds they're looking for is how I learned how to plug in. So in the case of credit policy management, this is the credit policy is like our guiding criteria by which we lend, right? And so but it's involved every line of business in the bank at the credit policy management level. So now they valued my business line experience because I used credit policy my entire career. But now, so I could take, so that's what they needed to invite me up. But I got to learn so much more. Now I got to learn how the bank does deals in all 30, 31, 32 lines of business, from foreign exchange to, all across the bank. And that also, as I said earlier, exposed me to a broader range of people at the top of the house who are used to looking at the risk to the institution, as a whole. And because climate was going to affect that, and so maximizing the range of your consideration is just the flip side. Is a continuation of letting go of the how, is widening your focus from I have to take these 12 steps to what's the next best step I can take that will propel me forward. And then from that position, based on what you learn, what's the next best step that will propel me forward? And I can tell you, yeah, it's not going to be a vertical line. It's going to be, and that's okay. That's okay because you're going far faster. And I did, far faster than I ever anticipated getting there, and it's because I did not box myself in to some preconceived understanding of how best to get there.
Can you speak a little bit about what it was like on a really personal level? Because I'm aware that when we tell stories of career transition and when people hear it, it can sound, again, we have that benefit of hindsight, right? So we can see, and I had the same thing with my very different story, which is I can now talk about like what I describe as the wilderness years, and I can see all of those pieces like coming into place, all those threads weaving together. But at the time, it did not feel like that. At the time, I couldn't tell you how it made sense that I was going on a forest bathing experience or that I wanted to run retreats. All of this just kind of felt like a complete departure from the entrepreneurial path that I've been on up to that point. And I think very similar to you, what I was able to do was kind of let go of that and just trust like that, that I'm in a process and I'm exploring and I'm trusting that it will all come together at some point. But I know, in the moment, there were times when that was really difficult for me, like on the level of my nervous system, because as you say, we're not socialized for that kind of exploration to be okay. We're not told that you go into a career and then at some point you might want to make a big shift and a big dramatic transition. We're told like linear progress, pick a lane, get in your lane, succeed as far as you can. And I'd love to hear just like what that whole experience was like for you at the level of your nervous system, how you looked after yourself through it.
Yeah, wow. Thank you, Alyssa, for that question. Yeah, it was just listening to you describe it. Brings me so deeply back into that moment. This is really about who we are. We we have been convinced by the societies in which we live in that we're much smaller than we actually are. That we simply don't have the power that we actually have. And this is what shoehorns us into the lanes that we happen to get into, and then we stay in those lanes. And people even on that journey, they even give up on the expectation that they could be happy or the expectation that they could be fulfilled because this is their lane. This is who they are. This is all they can do. When you start to shed that and you start to get in touch with who you are, right? look in the mirror. Who is that person looking at me? What does that person value? Okay. What does that person want? Right. Questions that once we get into our adulting period, we stop asking. Right. When we were teenagers, it was all about what is it now? What our dreams are. Right. Okay. But if you reopen that box and start to go down the journey of rediscovering who you are. And it's a necessary step, because this is how you find if you're ever going to find fulfillment, this is how, by aligning who you are with what you do, you know, and, um, and so how it felt, if I wasn't doing the interpersonal work at the same time, I wouldn't have been able to do it. As the amount of courage that we are capable of does not come from what other people tell us about ourselves. It really comes from understanding who we are. Right. So while I was going through those stages in my career, I was doing a lot of work on understanding Kevin Howard, within the context of this reality in which we live. And so I came to learn that that we each have an ability to ascertain what is true about what we're experiencing, what is true about what we're doing, what is true about how we're living, what is true that makes life make sense, right? We have a capacity to ascertain that is independent of everything else that we're told. And that to the extent we get in touch with our sense of truth, and it feels like one of our senses. This, I call it a sense of resonance. You walk into an elevator and the hair on the back of your neck goes up. That tells you something is wrong. No one has said anything and no one has done anything. Where does that come from? That's your sense of resonance, right? Okay. So if you get in touch with that quiet inner voice in you, that represents who you actually are, what you actually value, what you actually want, that type of thing. You start to gain clarity, even if you're in uncharted waters. And that's what this transition is about. You're going where no person has gone before, or at least you're going where you haven't gone before, right? To get the courage to do that, what guides you? Your sense of resonance. What I'm going to do today? This new choice that's outside of my lane, going to credit policy management. I felt drawn to it. I looked at what it did, and it said, yes, this is an opportunity. There are things I need to learn here that can get me in position. I didn't know how, but it resonated, right? It did not feel like I was rolling the dice. And I just came, and that's what came up on the roulette wheel. No, and so that's why it's really important for anyone considering this transition. The work is to start out understanding who you are, and that will inform how you go about. That will inform. Oh yeah, I'm not where I need to be. And you will find that you are empowered to do that. So how it felt like the most natural thing. I was free. I was not constrained by social expectation. Now, I was also blessed with a wife, a partner, a life partner, Nicole, who, and here I made this transition in my 50s. So let's understand that, right? Okay. So I went to her, we talk about everything, and I said, all right, Nikki, I know we're doing fine. And, we just got this new house, all this stuff. Okay. But I'm called, to make this transition. And the thing about it is she was doing her own work too. And so it just made sense. And so I did not have to fight, or go, in other words, I had a partner who would support me in that reality that, okay, we're growing. This is different. You're going in a direction we're going to trust, so it wasn't just me by myself, and it would be extremely hard. I don't even know how if I would have been able to do it, if it wasn't for the fact that I had a partner who made it safe for me to go down that path, to explore what was calling me, right? So but that's so for me, I felt I'm finally where I need to be. I wasn't there yet, but I was on the path of where I needed to be, and I just wanted to keep on going.
So beautiful. So beautiful. And I think this is a good time as well to touch on your fourth lesson, which is to practice the art of living presently. Because all through what you were sharing about the inner work that you were doing, and even I imagine, your conversations with Nikki and taking that kind of leap of faith together, I think the ability to try to live in the present is so crucial when we are entering consciously into such an uncertain period and into an uncertain future, which is essentially, as you said, this is regenerative work. So the chances are that you are doing something not only that you have never done before, but there's a pretty good chance that nobody has done it before, right? And they've
Yeah.
certainly not done it in the unique way that you're going to do it. Like, this is real uncharted territory that we're entering into. And it's so important, I think, to acknowledge that, because it changes when you understand that. It changes how you approach it. It changes your expectations. Like, it isn't going to be signposted clearly all along the way. There isn't,
Exactly.
a perfect step-by-step guide for how to get there. You have to, as you say, set that intention, keep moving in the right direction, do the work with yourself, find your own truth, but also, I think, keep coming back to the present, keep coming back to the moment, because so much of what holds us back in this, it's actually anticipation. It's fear of the rejection that may come, it's fear of the failure that may come, it's fear of the financial implications that may be around the corner, and we put so much of our energy and focus on that. And this is not to say not to be, practical and sensible in how you approach this, but in my experience, people put so much energy onto those anticipated future fears, and then what they're actually doing in the present is nothing. They're not taking any action at all because they're so consumed by what may or may not be in the future. So I love this fourth lesson that you've offered us, to practice the art of living presently.
Yeah, it is. And I've done some searching to try to get the book I had read back in like the late '90s. It was a book written by a gentleman from India, and it was about this notion of living presently. And I really think it was a book club recommendation from Oprah Winfrey. I have to give you some, But the idea is, I read it, and it to me, it was like revolutionary, because again, how are we? Modernity has encouraged us to multitask, to to pre-plan. We spend so much of our energy thinking about what has already happened or what's about to happen, and we give and then in any given now moment, we're doing multiple things at the same time. I mean, contemplate driving home from work every day. Now, who hasn't had the experience where, since they drive home and they use the same route basically every day, you know, where they got into the car, they had things on their mind, and they wound up home? They don't remember anything from the route, right? Because they were looking on the road, they could see the cars in front of them, they'd slow, but they were multitasking, right? Exactly. There could be 12 new restaurants on that route. They didn't see them, right? Okay, this is modernity. We live this way, where the amount of focus we give in a given moment could be trivial compared to our capacity to actually experience the now moment. And so the art of living presently is to acknowledge that the only thing that's real is now. What has happened already happened. What hasn't happened. Now is the only thing that's real, right? And that if you participate fully in now, that is the best you can do to create the future that you want. right? Right. And that you're absolutely, you spoke about a common way we undo ourselves is that our imaginations, our stream of consciousness can always envision as it's trying to protect us. Our egos are trying to protect us, can always envision all the ways we're going to fail. You don't really want to do that because here's a billion reasons why. Of course, you're not going to go from the doing small business loans to telling U.S. Bank how to how to manage climate risk. What are you talking about? Get back in your lane, right? Okay, all that comes from thinking about the future, thinking about how is this going to happen, not being able to see how it's going to happen. So you create a nightmare scenario, just like when you hear the creaky floor in the middle of the night in the dark, here comes the axe murderer. Well, okay. The whole point of practicing the art of living presently is to exclude all that, to say, I'm going to try. And it is a practice to put as much of my focus right now into what's happening now. And when I started doing that 20 years ago, there was a simple exercise to focus in on some basic things that you do that you never think about. So the one exercise was washing my hands. And the first time I just actually concentrated on how I washed my hands, I'm gonna put my hands up, you're right, is I noticed that the pattern of how I washed my hands, right? I was never washing this thumb. This thumb was not this thumb was getting washed, but I was not I was never washing this thumb. And it's just, it's a simple, silly thing. But when you are doing things and you're not putting your attention into it, you're operating at a much lower efficiency. And that's in your actual tasks for your job. That's in your relationships with the people in your life. That's in anything, right? If you put your full attention into it, your full ability will manifest. You bring to bear. You actually learn and hear much more. There is so much more going on now that we miss because we narrow our focus by putting so much energy into what hasn't happened, to what already happened, to what else I could be doing, and yet we're doing something in this now moment, So yeah, it is truly a superpower. It is, to, because I cannot express this enough. If the people who I walk up to who, I'm just at the gas station getting the gas and paying for getting a soda at the counter or something like that. If you show up and you're present, and so when you say to you, "Hey, how you doing today?" You're actually listening. You're not thinking about the 12 things you got to do and stuff like that and just throwing out a comment. It really takes people by surprise and they love it because what happens? This person is actually hearing me. This person is not, and that's all I mean. It is an absolute superpower because it allows you to truly, fully realize what we are experiencing. And you would be amazed of how much information and how that empowers you to proceed to the next moment. And oh, by the way, whatever the danger that's coming, you will see that better. It doesn't help you to imagine what that danger is and to curl up in a ball. No, to have that wide vision, fully empowered with all your senses, seeing what's actually real as it actually happens. You have plenty of time to protect yourself if you need to, So yeah, that's the art of living presently, and it's been it's been my superpower over my last 20 years.
And so your fifth lesson for us is to make progress to manifest your new intention every day. And I feel like that grows directly out of that presence that you've just described, because it's only when we are really aware in the moment, in that day, in each day that comes to us, open to those opportunities, to those interactions, that we can then take those conscious steps in the right direction. So I would love for you to tell us about why you included this as your final lesson and how it has served you through your career from climate risk management and beyond.
Well, see, so here, so you're living presently. You're here. You're showing up. How do I use this moment? Participate in this moment. But what happens in this moment is not simply a function of me and the choices I make. It's a function of everyone who's showing up in this particular moment. So as you get into the moment, right? If you ask yourself, what can I do now to advance my intention, right? With no other consideration on your mind because you're fully present, all of a sudden you start seeing, well, I can write that letter. I can work on an offering sheet for the kind of service you might want to offer. I can reach out. You remember in that moment, oh, I meant to get back to that contact. Saturday, Sunday, every day, you can move your intention closer to the reality every day. If you ask yourself that question, stay present enough and just hear what comes to your mind. What is the range of choices that you can do, right? Because it's silly, but it is as simple as there was this when I was a kid, there was this Christmas um a Christmas show, cartoon, right? And it had this scene in it, right? And it's relevant to what I'm saying here. It was this old man, and he was a crickety old man and stuff like that. And they were singing this song, about put one foot in front of the other, and soon you'll find you're walking across the floor. Put one foot in front of the other, and soon you'll find you're walking out the door. Right. When we intend for something extraordinary, if we take each day to do that one step, at least one step, you know, we will get there. we will. That's how you get there. And the empowering thing about it is because you intentionally did it. You intentionally decided to stay present. You intentionally decided to consider all possibilities. You intentionally decided, amongst those possibilities, what resonated to you, what spoke to you. And then you took action. And when you go to bed that night, and this is me, when I go to bed that night, I'm thankful. I'm grateful. Because what did I do? Today, when I look at my day, I moved the needle here. I moved the needle there. I had these 12 plates spinning, and the progress is being made, and I can actually see it. And that becomes the fuel for further inspiration, so that when you wake up the next morning, you jump out of your bed because, hey, you're on the path, you're on the journey. And so that's what that is. If you make progress every day, if you do that, that's the sustaining energy to achieve anything you need to achieve, anything you want to.
Live by words to live by, Kevin. I think I believe in this so deeply. To me, it's the foundation of what coaching is here to help people with, and the role of a coach is that incremental daily action. And as you described it, it's exactly the words, like, what is my next right step? Just focus on that. Just do that step. Stop looking behind. Stop looking ahead. Be present and focus on that next step. And I don't care if it's tiny. I don't care
Yeah.
if it's tiny, tiny, tiny. Just do it, right? Because we don't get there by hoping. We don't get there by worrying. We don't get there even by educating ourselves. Like, all of those things are important, but we have to take action. Stay focused on that intention and just keep putting one foot in front of the other in the direction that feels right to us.
That's right. Absolutely. And so Alyssa, I am so excited by this conversation, and I'm so honored that you took the time to give me the opportunity to share my story. So I just wanted to take this moment to thank you, and to anyone who's listening. Um, the good news about this story is that each of us are empowered to make these choices. We just have to look inside and get a sense of who we are and what really matters to us, and we'll know what to do.